නව ඩොමෙක්ස් වැල්ලම් සහ විසබීජ අවම කර දින 3ක් දක්වා ටොයිලට් එක ෆ්‍රෙෂ්ව තමයි. ඩොමෙක්ස්.
The man with a plan. Finance Minister Ali Sabri says at Hyde Park that hard decisions will have to be taken and he's the man for the task.
Now that debt servicing burden is out of us, then you are looking at the bridging finance, whether IMF can help us, World Bank can help us, ADB can help us, our friends can help us so that we get on board again and the normal life can start.
Further down, international ratings agencies hit Sri Lanka with further downgrades in response to the default announcement. To the rescue, Indian sources hint at a possible new $2 billion financial package to free Sri Lanka. The time is now. The World Bank calls for urgent policy measures to protect the poor and vulnerable. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Thursday, the 14th of April, 2022.
Nelly මතකෙන් ගිලිහුණු black shiny කෙස් කලඹක රහස sunset black shine සමගින්.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, bringing you the latest from across Sri Lanka this single and Tamil New Year. This is First at 9 and I'm David Ebert. Now, following the recent default announcement by the country's finance ministry a few days ago, international ratings agencies have decided to downgrade Sri Lanka further. Rating agencies Fitch Ratings and Standards & Poor's have both announced downgrades of Sri Lanka's long-term foreign currency issuer default rating, and this will continue. Fitch Ratings has downgraded Sri Lanka's long-term foreign currency issuer default rating to C from CC. The issue ratings on foreign currency bonds issued on the international market have also been downgraded to C from CC. Meanwhile, the long-term local currency IDR has been affirmed at CCC and the country's ceiling at B-. In its key rating drivers, Fitch says that the downgrade of Sri Lanka's long-term foreign currency IDR reflects Fitch's view that a sovereign default process has begun. It adds that this reflects the announcement by the Ministry of Finance on the 12th of April 2022 that it has suspended normal debt servicing of several categories of its external debts, including bonds issued in the international capital markets and foreign currency denominated loan agreements or credit facilities with commercial banks or institutional lenders. It added that it plans to downgrade the long-term issuer default rating once a payment on an issuance is missed and the grace period has expired. Further, with Fitch stating that with locally issued government debt, whether in local or foreign currency, not affected, some local currency issuances ratings have been corrected to CCC and now affirmed. In the meantime, Standard & Poor's has also followed suit and lowered Sri Lanka's long-term foreign currency sovereign rating from CCC to CC for the same reasons. It has also lowered Sri Lanka's long-term local currency sovereign credit rating from CCC to CCC-, at the same time affirmed C for the short-term rating. S&P's outlook on ratings is negative and reflects the high risk to commercial debt repayments in the context of Sri Lanka's economic, external and fiscal pressures, it added. S&P also added that it could lower the local currency ratings if there are indications of non-payment or restructuring of rupee-denominated obligations as well. It also warns that failure to establish a sustainable government could further complicate and hinder progress in discussions with the IMF and ultimately delay a debt restructuring plan. Finance Minister Ali Sabri says that he remains confident that he can push through the necessary reforms Sri Lanka needs to pull itself out of the current crisis with some international help. Speaking to Indivari Amuwatta on a current affairs program at Hyde Park, the Finance Minister added that this will include hard choices such as major fiscal policy reforms, but added that the people too need to help the process out by keeping economic activity going. Finance Minister Ali Sabri laid out his plans for meeting with the International Monetary Fund this month and outlined what Sri Lanka will need to achieve to be able to convince its international partners that it can sustain itself. He explained that eliminating queues, a smooth debt restructuring process, And most importantly, hard decisions such as fiscal reforms will be a key component of Sri Lanka's proposal.
You're due to meet IMF officials to negotiate a deal for Sri Lanka, and this proposal has to be taken from the Sri Lankan party, and they say Sri Lanka needs to have a proper proposal and program in place before you negotiate this with the IMF. Are you prepared?
We are in the course of preparation. Today also my officials have had a discussion with that, with experts and with various support groups, and the expert panel which the President has appointed. There are 5 areas which I am focused right now. One is the immediate crisis management.
Right.
That is, we need to have that support that you call it as mitigating the pain. So how to restore the supply chain, how to avoid this, the gas queue, the petrol queue, the diesel queue, the kerosene queues, and also the electricity cut and all those things, get the normal life back on track. So we need to talk to our partners and get that going. So several attempts are going on. Today you would have seen, consequent to my discussion a couple of days ago, World Bank had released $10 million for medicine. We are planning to meet them also for a larger proposal to them. So that's the immediate contingency. That's the Indian credit line had come in very handy at this very, very difficult time, kind of a lifeline. We are discussing that to be continued so that the normal life comes back. So number 2 is, as you say, that the debt restructuring that has to take place in a very orderly manner. For us to do that, we have already kind of floated the RFP for appointment of the financial advisor and the legal advisor. Hopefully within next 14 to 21 days we will appoint them and then take it in that sense. Now that debt servicing burden is out of us, then you are looking at the bridging finance. During that bridging finances period, whether IMF can help us, World Bank can help us, ADB can help us, our friends can help us, so that we get on board again and the normal life can start and the normal structures go on. Fourthly, important thing is the important fiscal reforms need to take place in terms of tax revisions and realistic prices and looking at the loss-making SOEs. So that's one area of it. And thereafter, we must find a way. Whatever we do, going to IMF will not solve all our problems. So it only gives a little bit of confidence for us and some lifeline in terms of bridging finance. But it is for the Sri Lankan people to on the ground to restore our economic growth. That can only happen when the production comes back to the normal in terms of our crops, in terms of our agriculture, and then our production lines in garment trade, restoring our tourism and fisheries, IT sector and all those things.
Meanwhile, when asked how Sri Lanka's economy came to such a point, the finance minister stated that it all came down to the plausibility of alternative plans.
Here, what happened here?
If you look at it, though we were in the cabinet, technically we were confined to look into our areas of it. We were vociferous, we were telling this, and I think entirety of the cabinet was saying that about a year ago we must go to IMF. But decisions relating to the economy was handled by a handful of officials. We all know that. And all 4 of them, former 2 governors, former secretary to the Treasury and former secretary to the President, all of them who were running the economy, for whatever the reason, they would have had some alternative planning or homegrown solutions to say so. They were against going to IMF and debt restructuring. But unfortunately, it was obvious those alternatives were not sustainable. Those alternatives were not plausible.
Meanwhile, several Indian sources have told foreign media that India is ready to support Sri Lanka with a further $2 billion in financial assistance, including swaps and credit lines. With recent hints that China is also keen on proceeding with Sri Lanka's $2.5 billion request, the sources say that India wants to reduce Sri Lanka's reliance on China by supporting the island financially. At the moment, Sri Lanka is currently in talks with some countries, including India, for more financial assistance, at a time when negotiations with the International Monetary Fund are expected to begin on Monday, the 18th of April. Sri Lanka has already received up to $2.5 billion from its closest neighbor India, and according to Reuters sources, more could be on the way. The sources say that the Indian administration has expressed keenness to provide additional assistance to Sri Lanka, despite the island's recent default announcement. According to the sources, the assistance could amount to $2 billion, including through swaps and other support. This comes on the back of a recent announcement by the chairman of the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, Sumit Vijayasinghe, that negotiations are underway for another $500 million credit line for fuel purchases. India's last credit line that has paid for a majority of Sri Lanka's recent fuel purchases is expected to end by the second week of May. In addition to this, Sri Lanka is also looking forward to a positive response from China towards a $2.5 billion loan/swap. Sri Lanka's ambassador in China, Dr. Paritha Kohana, stated earlier this week that the signs are certainly auspicious for this to come through as well. However, the Reuters report says that according to the sources, the Indian administration is concerned about Sri Lanka's debt to China and is willing to assist it in reducing it. This would lead to a stronger and more stable Sri Lanka, they say. The Indian sources have further said that they believe India has been able to make Sri Lanka realize which country is in a better position to support it. And we'll be back with more local news right after this short break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Despite today being the Sinhala and Tamil New Year, the calls for the government to resign did not see a reduction in numbers as anti-government protests worked for the 6 days today. The protesters at the Golf Face Green continued the demonstrations while celebrating the New Year at the protest site in the company of people of all faiths. Golf Face Green in Colombo at present doesn't look like it should have been on a usual Sinhala and Tamil New Year's Day. Public protests calling for the resignation of the president and the government went on into a 6th day. Despite many expectations for crowds to thin out today due to the island-wide New Year holiday, the persistence of the protesters continues. Instead, the agitation has been attracting crowds from all over Sri Lanka. According to a social media post, a group of youth from Kandy was set to embark by train to Colombo to join the crowds at Golf Face Green. According to our area correspondent, over 100 Kandy youth were seen gathered at the Kandy railway station, waiting to catch their train. Back at the Gota Go Gama campsite, the protesters have also laid out their response to an invitation extended by Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa to meet with their representatives and listen to their demands. A table has been set up inviting the Premier to the protest site for any talks to signify their cynicism towards the idea. As the New Year dawned this morning, protesters held their own Sinhala and Tamil New Year celebrations as well, following all customs. A significant observation of today's celebrations was the participation of members of all 4 religions in the island. In addition, representatives of the Catholic community were seen marking Maundy Thursday at the protest site as they come to the end of the season of Lent. Meanwhile, outside Colombo, more protests were seen taking place, with their calls echoing those of the Golf Face protesters, urging the president and the government to resign immediately. Further, as has been seen in the past week or more, anti-government protests organized by the overseas Sri Lankans also continued in several foreign cities. Now, the World Bank says that Sri Lanka requires urgent policy measures to address the high levels of debt and debt service, including by reducing the fiscal deficit, restoring external stability, and mitigating the adverse impacts on the poor and vulnerable. This was stated in the World Bank's twice-a-year regional update today. Meanwhile, the report comes on the back of comments by Sri Lanka's finance minister that talks with the IMF, the World Bank, and bilateral partners would look to source between $3.3 to $4 billion to help the nation pull through. The World Bank says that Sri Lanka's economic outlook is highly uncertain due to its fiscal and external imbalances. In its twice-a-year regional update released yesterday, the World Bank adds that urgent policy measures are needed to address the high levels of debt and debt service, reduce the fiscal deficit, restore external stability, and mitigate the adverse impacts on the poor and vulnerable. The report, titled The Latest South Asia Economic Focus, Reshaping Norms, A New Way Forward, it projects the region to grow by 6.6% in 2022 and by 6.3% in 2023. The 2022 forecast has been revised downward by 1 percentage point compared to the January projection, mostly due to the impact of the war in Ukraine. Countries in South Asia are already grappling with rising commodity prices, supply bottlenecks, and vulnerabilities in financial sectors, it added. It warns that the war in Ukraine will amplify these challenges, further contributing to inflation and deteriorating current account balances. In the report, World Bank Country Director for Maldives, Nepal and Sri Lanka, Fariz Haradzervos, said that the World Bank is deeply concerned about the uncertain economic outlook in the island and the impact on its people. He also stated that the World Bank is working on providing emergency support for poor and vulnerable households to help them weather the economic crisis, adding that it remains committed to the well-being of the people of Sri Lanka and to a narrative of sustainable and inclusive growth that will require concerted and collective action. The report also warns that Sri Lanka needs to address the structural sources of its vulnerabilities through reducing fiscal deficits, especially through strengthening domestic revenue mobilization. Further, it also calls on Sri Lanka to find feasible options to restore debt sustainability. In addition, the report also warns that the financial sector needs to be carefully monitored amid high exposure to the public sector and the impact of the recent currency depreciation on banks' balance sheets. It adds that necessary adjustments may adversely affect growth and impact poverty initially, but will correct the significant imbalances, subsequently providing the foundation for stronger and sustainable growth and access to international financial markets. Liquefied Lanka Limited says that 8,500 metric tons of LP gas are expected to arrive in Sri Lanka in the near future. Further, the company says that operations at its Keravalapitia terminal, which were halted until the 18th of April, will recommence after the arrival of the necessary LPG stocks. Yesterday, Liquefied announced a halt in the operations at its Keravalapitia terminal until the 18th of April. Issuing a media communique today, the company said that its operations will recommence on the 18th upon the arrival of required LPG stocks. Further, Liquefied says that Sri Lanka is expected to receive 8,500 metric tons of liquefied petroleum gas in the near future as well. Meanwhile, a 40,000 metric ton diesel shipment is expected to arrive in Colombo today. However, although assurances have been given by the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation that there is adequate fuel stocks in the country, several refueling stations were seen closed during the day due to unavailability of fuel. As for the filling stations that remained open, queues were seen for both petrol and diesel, showing how the public continues to struggle to pump fuel into their vehicles, despite today being the Sinhala and Tamil New Year. Meanwhile, spokesperson for the Archdiocese of Colombo, Reverend Father Cyril Gamini Fernando, says that the Catholic Church will support the mass protests at Golf Race Green against the current president and the government, but has no plans to hold Easter Sunday Mass at the location. These views were expressed today by Reverend Father Cyril Gamini Fernando during a media briefing where he responded to comments made by the Defence Secretary Kamal Gunaratne during a press briefing held yesterday on the progress of the investigations into the Easter Sunday terror attacks. The Catholic Church today questioned how respondents named by the Presidential Commission investigating the Easter Sunday attacks have been acquitted and released if, as the Defence Ministry says, investigators and the Attorney General's Department have been truly committed to ensuring justice. Spokesperson for the Archdiocese of Colombo, Father Cyril Gamini, said that during a media briefing, the Defence Secretary General Kamal Gunaratne claimed that all accused in the Easter attacks have been prosecuted and that the filing of the case was done with great dedication and effort. Father Gamini also questioned how individuals named by the Presidential Commission for having neglected their duty to prevent the attacks despite having prior warning could be acquitted and released by the courts.
පාස්කු ප්‍රහාරයේ චූදිතයින්ට චෝදනාව නඩු ගොනු කිරීම ඕම කැපවීමෙන් පරිශ්‍රමයෙන් කාලය වැය කරලා සිදු කළයි කියලා මේ ප්‍රවෘත්ති සාකච්ඡාවේදී කියනවා. එහෙම කළා නම් පාස්කු ප්‍රහාරය ගැන දැන ඒක වළක්වා ගන්නට කටයුතු නොකර සිය රාජකාරිය බරපතල ලෙස පැහැර හැරි බවට කොමිසම නම් කරලා තියෙන අයව කොහොමද අධිකරණයෙන් නිදොස් කොට නිදහස් වෙන්නේ?
In addition, when questioned on the church's claims of a political conspiracy behind the attacks, Father Gamini had this to say.
කොතනකවත් කියලා නැහැ. මේ රජය තමයි කුමන්ත්‍රණය කළේ කියලා. කුමන්ත්‍රණයක් තියෙනවා. කිව්වේ අපි නෙමෙයි. හිටපු නීතිපතිවරයා. වළක්වා ගත හැකිව තිබියදී වළක්වා නොගන්තේ බුද්ධ්‍යංශ තොරතුරු ලැබිලා. සියලුම ප්‍රභු ආරක්ෂක අංශවලට ලියුම් අරිනවා. බෝම්බ විපිරෙන තියනවා කියලා. හැබැයි පල්ලිවලට සාමාන්‍ය ජනතාව ආරක්ෂා කරන්න පියවරක් ගන්නෙ නැහැ.
Further, Father Gamini also announced that the church has no intention of holding Easter Sunday Mass at the Golf Race Green, but will support the youth engaged in a protest.
මම දැක්කා සමාජ මාධ්‍යවල තියෙනවා පාස්කු මෙහෙයන් පැවැත්වෙනවා කියලා ගාලු මුහුදර පිටියේ නෑ. අපේ එහෙම කිසිම අදහසක් නෑ. මොකද ගාලු මුහුදර පිටියේ පැවැත්වෙන අරගලය ආගම් ભેදයෙන් තොර, ಜಾති ભેදයෙන් තොර පොදු මහ ජනතාවගේ අරගලයක්. ඒ නිසා ඒක ඇතුලේ ආගමික කටයුතු කරන්න කිසිම අදහසක් නෑ. නමුත් අපි කතෝලික සභාවක් හැටියට අරගලයේ යෙදී සිටින තරුණ පරම්පරාවට අපේ සහයෝගය ලබා දෙනවා. අපි මේ අරගලයේ පැත්තේ හිටගෙන ඉන්නවා.
Despite the daily challenges to their livelihoods, at the dawn of the Sinhala and Tamil New Year this morning, Sri Lankans all over the country performed their New Year rituals like normal In Sri Lanka, the Sinhalese and Tamil communities celebrate the dawn of the new year known as Alut Aurudu in Sinhala and Puthandu in Tamil, and is one of the most significant cultural celebrations in the Sri Lankan calendar. The new year dawns due to the transition of the sun from the house of Pisces to the house of Aries. A number of customs and traditional beliefs are associated with Aurudu celebrations in Sri Lanka. And despite the country being in the midst of a national crisis, it didn't stop Sri Lankans from sticking to the New Year traditions and customs. This year, the inauspicious time preceding the New Year, or Nonagathaya, dawned at 2:17 a.m. this morning. During this period, all household work, studies and business activities are halted, and this even relates to the consumption of food. This is a time solely devoted to religious observances and fellowship with family. The Nonagathaya period ended with the dawn of the New Year at 8:41 a.m. this morning. Following this, the auspicious time for the preparation of the family meal for the New Year dawned at 9:05 a.m. This also coincided with the auspicious time for engaging in official duties, transactions and partaking meals, which fell at 9:05 a.m. as well. Meanwhile, the auspicious time for the customary anointing of oil falls at 7:04 a.m. on the 17th of April, while the time for leaving for work falls at 6:51 a.m. on the 18th. Meanwhile, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa issued his New Year message to the people. In his message, the head of state said that the current economic and global crisis has become the biggest challenge faced by Sri Lankans in recent history, and has called on the people to overcome this challenge with unity and better understanding. He also assured that the government is currently taking measures to restore normalcy to the lives of the people by properly understanding the present challenges. Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa in his message meanwhile said that the government is already putting into action the future plans needed to avoid the unexpected hardships during this challenging time. The Premier urged the people to work together in harmony and stand as one nation despite the difficult times. Meanwhile, opposition leader Sajid Premadasa in his statement stated that the country has been plunged into a serious economic and political crisis, and the normal standards of people have extraordinarily changed. Premadasa also expressed hope that this difficult season will come to an end, and that the dream of a prosperous, peaceful, reconciled and truly affluent tomorrow will come true. Sri Lankan Airlines says it has issued 4 requests for proposals to lease up to 21 aircraft to support its long-term business strategy. This includes 2 proposal requests covering existing fleet types and 2 parallel proposal requests to compare with alternative aircraft types. They say that roughly 60% of the planned aircraft will be for fleet replacement, and the remainder will be to support the airline's expansion strategy and meet the growing demand for air travel between Sri Lanka and the world. Further, it said that prior to the pandemic in 2019, Sri Lanka had an all-Airbus fleet of 27 wide and narrow-bodied aircraft to service its short and long-haul operations. During COVID, there were no replacements for 3 aircraft that left the fleet. The airline currently has 24 aircraft to operate to 40 destinations in 25 countries. The carrier said that it is planning for measured growth in the next 3 years through frequency increases and the addition of new destinations, as international travel is in a trajectory of recovery from the pandemic. And on that note, this is all the news we have for you tonight. We hope you join you again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.